Hi, I'm Jay, welcome to the workshop, and today we'll be talking about roof weight limits. Now this video is in a response to a video we put up a couple of weeks ago which showed our very unfortunate experience with overloading a roof rack on an Overland vehicle while tackling something admittedly a little bit on the hairy side. We had exceeded our roof's maximum weight carrying capability as well as the carrying capacity of the roof rack itself, which might have been fine on the road, but as you see in the video, which I'll put a link to somewhere on the screen now, we ended up exceeding the off-road specification for the roof rack. Now a few of you asked a couple of questions about how much can I put on my roof rack, how much versus off-road and on-road, what about rooftop tents, etc. And hopefully this video today will clarify that. Now first of all, what we need to distinguish between is static and dynamic roof loads. Now dynamic roof loads should be a specification in your owner's manual. This is the maximum weight you're allowed on top of your roof, including the roof rack, while in motion. This takes into account the sway of the vehicle during motion, vibrations and bumps on the roads, harsh braking and accelerating, etc. However, most manufacturers don't take into account very harsh off-roading. Mild off-roading should be fine for normal dynamic loads. However, once you start doing harsh off-roading, as in swaying the vehicle side to side quite dramatically like we did in the other video, even if you're within the recommended dynamic load, you could still be at risk of losing your roof rack, or worse, damaging the cab of the vehicle. However, as a ballpark figure, try and keep quite well underneath that dynamic load. We'd recommend maybe 10% under, so say for example my Hilux has a 70 kilo roof rating. 10% under that would be roughly 60 kilos. Now bearing in mind that the average weight of a rooftop tent, which again can vary from model to model, is between 40 and 50 kilos, and also you have to take into account the roof rack itself, which, depending if you go aluminium or steel, or actually the size of the roof rack on the vehicle, can be anywhere between 10 to 20 kilos. So you can see how things quickly add up. For a rooftop tent on there, maybe a couple of jerry cans, empty or full, you can see how easy it is to actually overload your roof rack. Now where things get a little bit more interesting is static loads. A static rating isn't normally provided by a manufacturer because it's a very unique situation. Why else would you need to load up your roof rack without moving anything? However, overlanders, especially people who are using rooftop tents, a static load can be quite interesting. Take your 70 kilo Hilux rating. Now, like I said before, we had a 20 kilogram roof rack, for example, and the 50 kilo rooftop tent. Well, that doesn't leave anyone to actually climb into it. Average person, let's say 80 kilos, and you're looking way over your roof rack limit. However, you're not going to be, I hope you're not going to be traveling around with two people in your rooftop tent, so dynamic rating isn't a concern here. Static ratings are much higher. Now to calculate your own static rating, there is a calculation you can do, and I'll link an article in the description below. Rule of thumb is a static weight limit is 10 times the dynamic load, which sounds a lot. 70 kilo Hilux can take 700 kilos on the roof. Might be a little bit unbelievable, but take a rollover for example, especially if it's a slow one, rather than tumbling down a steep valley. When they normally get put back on their wheels, the roof is actually quite intact. Even though it's had the weight of the whole vehicle, could be 2 ton in some cases, on the roof itself for sometimes a prolonged period of time, it's not as deformed as you think it would be. Now let's go back to our example with the rooftop tent. You have roof rack, 20 kilos, rooftop tent, 50 kilos, 2 adults, 80 kilos each. There's 250 kilos, which is well under the proposed static rating of 700 kilos. So, static wise, you're fine with 2 adults in a rooftop tent. But bear in mind, even though your vehicle can take 70 kilos dynamic and maybe 700 kilos static, you're only strong as your weakest component in your setup. In our case, our plastic Rhino Rack feet were that weak point. Thankfully enough, it was a weak point that was relatively easy to repair. They might have only been rated to, say, 50 kilos dynamically. With our 70 kilos on top, even though the roof would be fine, our mounting points aren't up to the job. So the key thing to take away from all this is research your manufacturer's roof weight capacity, dynamic, static if you can. Build in a off-road safety tolerance, say 10% to be safe. But keep in mind the lower the better. Research your roof rack specifications as well, especially the feet. Again, dynamic and possible static as well as off-road. And another thing we haven't touched on is centre of gravity. Remember, when you've got all that weight up high, centre of the gravity vehicle also raises, which means you've got a big pendulum effect on your vehicle. So as you take a sharp turn on the highway to avoid another vehicle, or a 45-degree or higher bank while off-roading, that weight is going to be pulling the vehicle over. If the weight's down low, it doesn't have as much of a leverage or a pendulum effect, whatever you'd like to call it, so that the effect is actually lesser on the vehicle. So my personal advice, with the exception of rooftop tent, because it's in the name, you kind of have to put it on the roof, try and keep everything else down low. Our spare water and fuel canisters are on the back, as low as I could get them on the bumper. Our gas canisters inside of the canopy with the vent open to allow any build-up of gas or any leakage of gas to leave the canopy. And the only things we actually keep on our uprack's roof rack now, which is aluminium, so lightweight, is the max tracks, because they, when used, will dirty up the living space of the canopy. So that's what you kind of want to do with your roof rack. You want to reserve it for items which will become dirty once after, either before or after use, or things that you pick up along the route, for like firewood, for example, which if you put in the back mixed in with all your cooking equipment, your clothes, maybe other bits of unused recovery equipment, can actually start causing a problem when it comes to hygiene or durability of the equipment. If you'd like some more information, or would like to ask any questions, please have a look at our forum or our Facebook page. Both I will link down below, and hopefully someone's in the same situation to you, of you, or has been in the same situation, has managed to work it out, and we can help you. Until then, see you later.